Back in 2001, a kid from Brooklyn walked into a gym packed with the best high school players in the country and walked out as the undisputed number one. Scouts were obsessed with him. Shoe companies were already circling his house, and his name was the only thing people in the basketball world wanted to talk about. Then, almost overnight, the hype just stopped. The big question is how the top prospect in America, a guy ranked higher than LeBron James and Carmelo Anthony, could vanish before he ever played a single second in the NBA. It really comes down to one specific choice he made. There was a moment where the road split in two, and Lenny Cook took the turn that changed everything for the worse. If you want to understand what happened to Lenny Cook, you have to look at where his story started, because those early years shape how you see the game and yourself. Growing up in Brooklyn wasn't easy for him, and his childhood had the kind of rough edges that make basketball feel like a lifeline instead of just a sport. The game became his exit strategy, and Lenny was so talented that for a while, it looked like the plan was actually going to work out perfectly. By the time he turned 16, people in the basketball world were already talking about him like a guaranteed lottery pick. This wasn't just a maybe or a possibly situation, because coaches and scouts were showing up to his games just to see that rare mix of size and instinct you simply can't teach. He had the kind of natural gift that everyone around him could recognize instantly. But the moment that truly put him on the map happened during the summer of 2001 at the ABCD camp in New Jersey. The ABCD camp was the biggest stage for high school players at the time, and every top prospect in the country showed up to prove they belonged. The gym was overflowing with college coaches, NBA scouts, and shoe reps who all wanted a front row seat to watch the next generation of stars go head to head. In that building, during that specific summer, Lenny Cook proved he was the best player on the floor. He actually outplayed LeBron James in a direct matchup right in front of everyone who mattered in the industry. Think about that for a second, because the same LeBron who became one of the greatest to ever play the game was the one who lost that battle. Lenny walked away from that camp holding the MVP trophy, while LeBron went home empty-handed. For that one summer, Lenny was the number one prospect in the entire country, and this wasn't just some quiet opinion held by a few insiders. It was public, it was documented, and the entire basketball world had seen it happen with their own eyes. You can imagine what that does to a 17-year-old kid from Brooklyn who grew up with nothing. Suddenly, he was the man, and the whispers about massive shoe deals and NBA millions started to feel like an absolute certainty. The problem is that peaking at 17 only matters if you keep climbing, and Lenny had just beaten the future king of basketball in front of the world. Instead of using that massive win as a starting point to get even better, that moment ended up being the highest he would ever go. So here is where the story turns, and it turns hard. In 2002, Lenny Cook decided to declare for the NBA draft. He skipped college entirely to bet on himself, but as he waited for his name to get called, the room stayed quiet. It never happened. Not in the first round, not in the second round, and not at all. Lenny Cook went completely undrafted, which is hard to wrap your head around when you realise this was the same kid ranked number one in the country just a year earlier. The phenom who outplayed LeBron James in front of the entire basketball world couldn't get a single NBA team to spend a late pick on him. While Lenny was watching his dream stall out, LeBron James stayed in school for one more year to keep working and building his brand. By 2003, the Cleveland Cavaliers selected LeBron first overall, and just like that, the gap between the two of them grew from inches to a canyon in only 12 months. Now you have to ask yourself how something like this happens. How does the top prospect in America fall that far and that fast? Part of the issue was definitely the basketball itself. Lenny had massive natural talent, but his game had holes that scouts couldn't ignore. His conditioning wasn't where it needed to be for the pros, and his ball handling tended to break down whenever the pressure dialed up. There were real questions about whether his specific skills would actually work at the NBA level, but plenty of players with flaws still get drafted every year because teams love to bet on upside. The real problem wasn't just what the scouts saw on the hardwood, but rather what they saw standing around the court. Lenny had a serious entourage problem. He was surrounded by people who needed him to believe he was already a finished product, because telling him he was ready served their interests instead of his. Nobody was there to pump the brakes or tell him the truth. No one sat him down to say he should go to college to develop his game and come back stronger. Instead, the voices closest to him were the loudest, and they were all whispering the exact same wrong thing into his ear. That's a common trap for kids who blow up at a young age. When you are the one everyone is counting on for a payday, the people in your circle have a huge stake in keeping you overconfident. But there is a massive difference between having confidence and living in a total delusion, and nobody in Lenny's life helped him see that line before it was too late. After the draft ended, the reality of his situation hit him hard and fast. Lenny started bouncing around minor leagues and showing up for tryouts that led nowhere. He got a few brief looks from teams that never turned into a contract, and every year that passed made the comeback story harder to write. The window wasn't just closing on him, it was already shut, but he just couldn't see it yet. In 2013, filmmakers Adam Barlow-Loff and Josh Safdie released a documentary simply titled Lenny Cook. It followed him years after his draft disaster, and the footage they captured is honestly difficult to watch. It isn't because Lenny was a bad guy, because he wasn't, but you could see the sheer weight of the world on him. The ghost of what could have been seemed to sit on his shoulders every single day. Here was a grown man still carrying around a version of himself that the rest of the world had moved on from long ago. He was still identified by a single peak moment from when he was just a teenager. And that is the part of this story that goes way beyond the game of basketball. When your entire identity is built on being the next big thing, and every person you know has told you since you were 16 that the NBA is your destiny, what happens when that destiny never shows up? Who are you supposed to be then? That isn't a basketball question, it's a human one, and it was a question Lenny had to answer without any real support to help him through it. That is the other piece of this tragedy that people don't talk about enough. Lenny Cook wasn't just a victim of bad advice, he was failed by a system that builds kids up with no plan for what happens if the dream doesn't land. There was no real mentorship and no one looking out for his long-term future instead of his short-term hype. The people who should have protected him were too busy riding the wave to notice it was about to crash into the shore. Lenny is not a unique case, and that is exactly why his story matters so much today. He represents a pattern. We have to wonder how many kids with generational talent get chewed up by the hype machine before they are mentally ready to handle the pressure. There are so many Lenny Cooks out there, guys who peaked at 17, got told they had already made it, and never had anyone help them build a life for when the cheering stopped.